An intellectual is a persistently curious curator of their interpretation of reality. They're willing to swap out interpretations for better ones should they come along. They're not open-minded in the sense of being equally open to all possibilities. They're confident that some possibilities are more likely than others. They reject some possibilities for others. Still, their minds are ajar. They listen for possibilities that they may not have noticed, they may have overlooked or even rejected. When they find a more likely interpretation, they swap out the less likely for the more likely, which is not easy. It's not flattering to admit you're wrong. Still, an intellectual identifies as learning, not learned. As such, they can take some credit for standing corrected, dignity intact. Since being an intellectual is being a curious curator of one's interpretations, you can be a novice intellectual with hardly any accumulation of interpretations. The longer you've been an intellectual, the more perspectives you've likely tried on. You'll have considered and rejected lots of interpretations, which can make you seem like a know-it-all, when you're just a know-lots. How can you tell if someone is an intellectual? I have two ways. If I'm talking to someone who is enjoying beyond my patience the delights of tunnel vision monologuing, I'll ask two questions, both of which reject one kind of answer. One is, what are your doubts? What remain live questions for you? The answer that's ruled out is, how can I get more people to believe what I believe? It's a perfectly fine question, but it isn't evidence of live curiosity. The other is, what have you been wrong about? The answer ruled out is any that implies I once was lost but now I'm found, like you've seen the light, sealed up, like you've had the last epiphany you'll ever need. Again, no evidence of live curiosity. On the second question, here are some of my doozies. The biggest was me in my youth, like all ideologues, thinking that all that was left to do was roll out the age of Aquarius. The far right would get educated, recognize the errors of their ways, and join the liberals because we were right and they were wrong. Like all ideologues, I could only foresee the day of victory and the happily ever after. I couldn't foresee the inevitable backlash. More recent and similar errors, I assumed Trump would be bad at corralling cronies. I failed to foresee how proud, honor-driven cronies would buckle and bend to maintain their status. The other is as recent as 2020. I believe Silicon Valley billionaires were a different breed, more liberal than robber barons of yore. I was wrong about that too. Perhaps these are variations on how can I get more people to believe what I believe. I have that motivation, but I was wrong about people. Left-wingers like me tend to be more unrealistic about how realistic people are. Right-wingers are more realistic about how unrealistic people are. They were right about this. I was wrong. In my research, I have lots of questions, too numerous and complicated to list here. I've been lucky to have mentors and colleagues who treat all answers as springboards to next questions. It's not easy. We'd rather rest on our laurels. They and I surely do that too. I chalk my mistakes up to hope overriding realism. Note to self, hope and hoax springs eternal. And I should be clear about hope. I mean hope that I'm right, which I think is the overlooked meaning of hope. Not just hope for a better future, but a better future by one's own standards. Despite better recording technology and video of all pundit pronouncements, pundits aren't forced to keep track of their bad predictions. Climate deniers or trickle-downers, for example, they haven't shed a drop of confidence, even though the evidence is clear. That's the trouble with failed abstract ideological interpretations. If your business fails, you have to face it. If your abstract ideological interpretation fails, you can pretend that it's but a scratch, like the knight in Monty Python's Holy Grail. Jesus, MAGA, and the South will rise again despite all the failed predictions from the prophets, my pillow guy and the KKK. And maybe they're right. They've proven more realistic than I have about how unrealistic people are. We all know Plato's allegory of the cave, if only through the Matrix's red pill, blue pill distinction. In the original, people are chained in a cave where false impressions are projected on the wall. One person escapes into reality, sees the light, and becomes the red pill philosopher king. By far the most popular interpretation of the story is that the philosopher king sees the light, becomes absolutely realistic, and is therefore duty-bound to rescue his fellow cave dwellers from delusion. The more accurate interpretation is that the guy escapes, sees that he was deluded, and reluctantly admits that he's deludable. Plato recognizes that humans prefer self-flattering affirmation over realism. That's a central theme in his work. Plato hoped that the philosopher king would feel secure enough that they wouldn't need self-flattering delusion. He was wrong about that, as I was wrong about today's robber barons. Security can make one brave enough to withstand reality's disappointments, but it is more likely to make one addicted to ever more security, especially because with security, one can afford as much comforting delusion as one wants, giving one the sense of having proven right about everything. A rich cocaine addict is at more risk of delusion than a poor one. Philosopher kings are more likely to end up deluded despots who act like they can do no wrong because they can get away with it. Indeed, delusion becomes a status symbol, like fuck you money. When secure, you don't have to care about anything you don't want to. Reality becomes a dismissible inconvenience. It's a rare person secure enough to be able to override self-affirmation with realism. That's the intellectual ideal. None of us ever fully achieve it. I'm sure I still harbor hopeful self-affirmations that will be proven wrong, whether I'm willing to concede it or not. Philosophy means love of wisdom, which is an odd name for a branch of research. We don't call geology geophilia, the love of rocks. Still, it makes some sense. Bertrand Russell defined philosophy as a peculiarly stubborn attempt to think clearly. The stubbornness is against oneself, its resistance to self-affirmation. The philosopher Piet Hein wrote that philosophers find their true perfection knowing the follies of humankind by introspection. The philosopher, like the intellectual, is peculiarly stubborn against the natural human tendency to study only to affirm what one already believes. What then is the difference between people who care about the difference between intellectuals versus know-it-alls and people who assume that anyone who disagrees with them is a know-it-all? People who don't care about the difference assume that intellectuals are know-it-alls because they disagree with them. To assume that anyone who disagrees with you is a know-it-all intellectual is to pretend you've seen the light everlasting, had the last epiphany you'll ever need, become enlightened, or at least found the one true path to enlightenment. Anti-intellectualism is the claim that what you know is already enough and that anyone who thinks harder than you is on a fruitless or counterproductive mission. It's to claim to have awoken once and for all, unlike everyday wakefulness, which leaves us drowsy and dull by evening. It's I once was lost, but now I'm blind. It's to claim to have taken the red pill, which is a sure sign that you've taken the blue pill, deluded by the delusion that one's delusional days are over. Understandably, people who live stressful lives need all the reassurance they can get. If they're education deprived or proud, blind faith trained, expecting that much intellectual curiosity is unkind. These people have always been the most susceptible to anti-intellectual know-it-all red pill philosopher kings and their cults of self-affirmation, the opposite of trying to keep up with reality, even if it's humbling. It's hard to blame the followers, but a sustainable future depends on them not taking over. Therein lies a challenge. Hope and hoax spring eternal.